It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. I'm the president of Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. We got a fascinating guest with us. He's an expatriate named Stephen Miiller, and had a very colorful life as a smuggler, a drug smuggler back in the day. But he's out and he's free and he wants to tell us about. I think he worked for the company, and we've talked a bit before. Mr. Miller, are you there?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Hey, tell us about yourself. Who is Stephen Miller?
Well, I'm just a small town boy. I grew up on a small farm near a town of 500 people, and in the 60s, and went to college and ended up signing up for the Navy and joining the Navy in 1969. And after I got out, I had trouble finding a job and got involved in the drug culture back home a little too heavily. So I moved down to Georgia to try to straighten out my life a little bit, and got down to Georgia and got involved in international marijuana smuggling. Started out as a driver and ended up doing electronic counter surveillance on the airstrips when the plane came in.
Now, before you got involved with the smuggling, did you have any kind of brushes with the law before that?
No. None at all.
Then how'd you meet these guys that were running the smuggling operation?
Well, when I got down there, I had a couple of friends who were down there. I won't name their names because they ended up not getting into trouble, but they were kind of involved with them, and they split away from them. I did a couple of little drives for them, but found out later I was getting paid way below the regular rate. I only got paid like $350 for driving down to Miami and picking up a load and bringing it back. Found out later I should have got $5 a pound, so I went with another group. There was a couple of groups of smugglers there in Atlanta that I know of. We all got along. We partied together and everything. There was never any trouble between the different organizations. And so I started driving for the company then, and they were based out of Illinois, just like I was. And one of the guys that I knew down there had gone to school with Ricky Thorpe at SIU, and that's how he knew him, and that's how I ended up getting involved. My main boss was Michael Grassi, who unfortunately passed away last year.
Now, this was a famous smuggling operation called the Company, right?
Right, that's what the DEA called us. They called us that because every time we needed something, we'd form a company. We had a trucking company. We owned Southeast Expressway Airport in Atlanta, Georgia, just to get aircraft fuel and for a place for our pilots to hang out. Most of our pilots were Vietnam pilots. In fact, I'd say 80 to 90% of us were Vietnam vets.
And so now, you personally, though, when you started out, you were picking up pot down in Miami and driving it to Georgia. That pot was coming from Colombia?
I believe so. See, the first load that I did, like that $350 load, I really don't even have any idea what was in my trunk. That's another scary part of it. That's why I quit driving for that group. Because I would drive down, I would go check into a motel. The next morning, I'd go out, get in my car, and drive home. They'd pick up my car in the night, load up the trunk, and the next morning I'd drive it back and deliver it to them. You know, later on, as they found out my electronic expertise, sometimes I would drive it to the Midwest, but usually once I started in the electronics end of it, my job was pretty much over once the plane hit the ground and, took off again. I would carry, I carried 1.75 miles of lighting equipment so I could set up a lighted runway anywhere. And I carried 5 to 7 scanners and an all-band frequency detector and an all-band several frequency I could transmit any frequency 1,000 watts, and back then the old radios used crystals, and I could blow the crystals out of any radio out there.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so your counter surveillance, you had an RF detector, right? So you were detecting RF radio wireless transmitters, right, that the cops were using?
Right. Yeah, they got real upset when they finally did catch me, and they caught my logbook, and they couldn't figure out how I had all these frequencies. That because I found the DEA was using like New York taxi cab frequencies for low-level surveillance, and they were also using, I think it was Kansas City Railroad frequencies, frequencies they weren't supposed to be using. But at that time, they just come out with synthesized scanners, and you could alter the scanner to scan each frequency or each band of frequencies, each night. So when I was in my house in Alabama, I had one heck of a setup at a small farmhouse in Alabama with a huge antenna, and I could scan all these frequencies, and if I found anything odd, I'd click on it and listen to it until I decided what it was. So I picked up all their frequencies, and that really made them mad.
And you had a way of transmitting and blowing out their circuits?
Yeah, when I was out on the runway.
Okay.
I had a parabolic antenna where I could pick up any audio sound, and I had, 5 to 7 scanners usually in the truck, scanning all the frequencies that I already knew. And I also had a frequency counter hooked up to my antenna so that anybody transmitted on any frequency that I wasn't monitoring, I would get a readout of it, and then I would then transmit 1,000 watts on that frequency to blow out the receive crystals in their radios, although I never had to do that.
Gotcha.
But that was just a plan of mine.
Gotcha. Now, what about the landlines? Did you also examine the landlines at the offices and stuff like that?
We rarely used, James Dugan, who was also one of the ringleaders, he'd lost both legs in Vietnam. He was also into electronics, and he was mainly involved in monitoring our landlines. He had a piece of equipment. He could detect a bug down to the nearest inch on a landline. So he took care of that. But out there in Alabama where I lived, we'd bought a farm out there that had a runway out behind it. This doctor had owned it, and it was just a shack, really, with this runway, and I put lights on it then. And because I was a country boy, I got the job of living out there part-time, and because I could get along with the locals. The other boys were all city kids, and they couldn't handle it. Randolph County, Alabama is the heart of the Ku Klux Klan territory. And they're real, especially at that time, they were real cautious about new people moving in. So I got that job out there.
And when you were living at this house, did your friends know what you were doing?
No. What, my friends back in Illinois?
Yeah, like your friends at the farmhouse when you moved into the farm down there,
Oh, no. They had no idea. as far as they knew, I was just caretaker for some rich guy that wanted to get away every once in a while to a quiet little place.
Gotcha. And what about the local cops? Were the local cops onto you?
Oh, no. Randolph County is a very remote county in Alabama. There's only three long-distance lines in the whole county at the time. So that we could have communication, I set up the best CB network in the world at the time. Both one from my boss back in Atlanta and one there for me in Alabama. At that time, it ran close to $3,000 for the antenna and tower and complete setup. I had the best CV setup in the world in 1978, 77.
Do you know how much they were paying for pot down in Colombia and selling it for in the States?
Well, I don't know what they were paying for it in Colombia. See, one thing about the company is you had all the information you needed to do your job, but that was it. You didn't ask about other phases of the operation. That was just like when we brought in a plane. We had 3 runways manned every time we brought in a plane. No one on one runway knew about the other 2.
Oh, fascinating.
Only the pilot and my boss, and toward the end, myself knew about any other runways or the location of any other runways. Some of the guys knew that there were other runways, but they had no idea where they were.
The first time I heard about the first time I heard about the company was on. Oh no, go ahead. You were selling what?
We were selling it for $2.80 a pound.
$2.80 a pound. Okay.
Back then, yeah.
$2.80 a pound, and that was what year? 78.
Yeah, 75, 76, 77, around in there.
Really? Because, the Yippies back in New York, they were selling a pound of Colombian for about $250, $300 a pound back around that time.
Yeah.
Just onesies and twosies.
Ours was the very, very best.
You think so, huh?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
Colombian gold, ash bud. You couldn't smoke a whole joint because the resin would be dripping off the end so thick by the time you got about halfway down, you couldn't suck on it anymore.
Now, what part of the country was this being sold in?
Mostly in Midwest. So we took a lot to Ann Arbor, Michigan, St. Louis, Chicago. I don't really know. The distribution end of it wasn't usually my end of it.
Right.
There was one crazy time I got in the middle of it. We were when the plane would come in, I would usually get 100 pounds for a couple of friends of mine there in Georgia and sell it to them. Well, one time we brought some in, and it was really good, and my friends loved it. They bought it. They immediately wanted another 100 pounds. So I went to my boss. He goes, well, something was up, so we didn't store anything here in Georgia, and it's all headed to the west. So if you want any, you got to go catch up with the caravan. So I took off in my 70 Mercury to catch up with them, and finally caught up with them on Interstate 55 in Illinois and followed them up to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Loaded up, drove back to Georgia, sold that. They loved it. So I said, to hell with it. Back then, we were only allowed to do cocaine and pot. The only drugs that were allowed. And back then, of course, nobody smoked cocaine. You started it. You could only snort so much. But anyway, I turned around, drove back to Ann Arbor, picked up another load, and then drove back. So I made 2 trips to Ann Arbor in like 48 hours from Georgia. That was a crazy trip. I got lost in an Indian reservation in South Carolina on the way back. I pull into into Georgia, I turn off my scanners and turn on the radio. The first thing I hear is the governor presided over 500 new state troopers that hit the road today. So I thought, oh shit.
Now, watch your language, man. I told you. Watch your language. I knew you'd be trouble, man. Let me ask you a question now. When you're driving around, did you have any close calls with the cops pulling you over and searching you and stuff?
Not too much. I had a 70 Mercury Monterey, which was very nondescript. And, of course, we all had attack-trained dogs. And I had Gabriel hijackers or air shocks in the back. And I used Michelin self-seeing radial tires.
Gotcha.
So, because you can't stop and change a tire, when you're hauling pot. And you can't carry your spare tire in your back seat. So, it didn't look like I was carrying anything. And if I did get pulled over, I turned my dog on, and I just tell them that she didn't like uniforms. And usually they wouldn't bother me. Because we had it wrapped pretty good. They used trash compactors down in Columbia,
right,
to make the pot into bales, and then it was sealed in gunny sack and then plastic. So it was sealed up pretty good. We toward the end, we were even using a DC-4 to bring in our pot.
Now, I first heard about the company on the David Susskind show, that he had some of the guys from the company on there. Did you know those guys? You ever see that show?
No, I didn't. Who did he have on? Do you know?
He didn't have Fuzzy Thorpe on because he was dead by then, I suppose, right? But he had some professional-looking guys.
I've never heard Ricky called Fuzzy.
Really? Because that's why I heard the first name, Fuzzy Thorpe. Now, Ricky Thorpe, he died in a parachute accident?
Not that I don't know.
No.
I don't know. Like I say, my main boss was they mainly stayed back in the Midwest. Ricky and Dugan and Mitchell mainly were back in the Midwest. I worked for Michael Grassi,
right,
who in the beginning got 33 years. He got it reduced down. He passed away last year of a heart attack. But that was my main boss. That's who I took my orders from, and some of the things I did only he knew about. Like I ran the money back down to Miami to his brother, who waited down in Miami for it to recycle it. That I had one really scary two scary adventures doing that.
Well, let's hear that.
Well, like usually when I go through Hartsfield Airport, I would just fly down. I would meet my buddy's brother. We'd exchange briefcases. I'd jump back on the same plane and fly back.
Right. Everything
was fine, But this one time, I'm going through Hartsfield, and this guy says, I'm going to have to open that briefcase. I said, and I had a fake company named Failsafe Security System. So I told him I was a paid courier, and if he wanted to open that, he would have to take me to an office. I wanted the office locked. I wanted his name. I wanted his home address. I wanted all his information before he opened that briefcase, because I was a paid courier. And he kind of got a little upset, flustered. Luckily, I think he was new on the job, because he did take me to an office in that, and he opened it up. It was $660,000 in the briefcase. And before he opened it, I said, "Now, I'm going to tell you right now, only myself and my employer know the contents of this briefcase. If anything happens to me, you'll be the first person that the police contact." He opened that. He saw all that money. He shot it real quick. He says, "Don't worry, Mr. Miller. Nobody will ever know." I was fine until I walked out of that office. When I walked out of the office, my legs turned to rubber.
Right.
I could hardly walk.
Now, you would fly using your real name? You would buy tickets under your real name?
Steve Miller. It's like John Jones.
Yeah, that's true.
And besides, the DEA knew exactly what we were doing. We knew exactly what they were doing. We had a DEA agent that cleaned our bathrooms at the airport. We knew he was. You know, we give him all the really bad jobs because we never brought in any pot into the airport. We only used the airport to get gas. See, in the beginning, you go to an airport and you got like 8 55-gallon drums in the back of your pickup truck. Say, you know, I need 400 gallons of aircraft fuel. They're kind of like, what, you know?
Gotcha.
So they bought the airport, and that way we had a place for our pilots to hang out. They taught a flying school there, and the DEA found out, so we hired one of their agents to work in the bathroom. But we had people that worked for the DEA too. You know, we were always one step ahead of them. We had more money. We had more technology. You know, it was a different time back then.
What about bribery? Did you pay any bribes?
I have no idea. You know, that wasn't part of my my part of the job. The bribes.
What about like shakedowns? Organized crime, shakedowns, stuff like that?
Oh, no, like I say, not mine. The closest to any kind of bribes was that I was involved with was if we had a client come to pick up some pot and for some reason the pot was late, I would get an escort for him so that he'd have a good time while he was there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's about as close.
What about like rip-offs? Any problems with getting ripped off?
We had a guy try one time. We flew down. This guy was supposed to make a new buy. It wasn't really our bunch, but it was a guy that had worked with our bunch. He thought he was going to become big time himself. So he went down, he took a bunch of money, and they were going to go get the pot, and they told him they had to put the money in the trunk. So they put the money in the trunk, and they stopped at this bar to call the place to make sure everything was all right. Well, they went in and called. They said, no, they, come out and said, we can't go. It looks like the place is hot. So they drove back. They gave him his briefcase. He ran to the hotel to come back. He opened his briefcase, and the money was gone. So the guy that had set it up, my people found out that he had booked a flight, and it was going to stop in Atlanta for a minute. So I get a phone call, hey, we need everybody, all hands on deck. And we went down, we met this guy in the airport. It was really kind of strange because we couldn't do too much because we couldn't attract a lot of attention, but he couldn't do anything either. He couldn't go to the cops. We couldn't go to the cops. We had to stop him. And they did, and I don't know what happened after that because my part of it was over there. That was just a show of force on that one. Gotcha.
Now, when I'm calling you now, you're out of the country. Can you want to talk about where you're living now?
Well, this is actually part of the United States.
Where are you?
I'm in the northern Mariana Islands. It's a Commonwealth of the United States. Everybody here is a U.S. citizen. It's the island I'm on is Rhoda. It's about 45 miles from Guam.
Okay. And how'd you wind up over there?
Well, when I was in the Navy, I fell in love with the islands, and I hated the snow growing up in the Midwest. And the cold and the change of weather. And so when I decided to finally got a chance to retire, I looked, and everywhere was either too touristy or there was one reason or another reason. I looked at American Samoa, I looked at Puerto Rico, I looked at the Virgin Islands, and then I found this little island, Rhoda. And it looked great, and I come here and I found that Well, we're known as the friendliest island in the world, and I believe it's true. It's home for the Chamorro culture. It's they're like a bunch of hippies here. So I feel there's no crime, there's no traffic, there's no pollution. It's beautiful.
Oh man, that sounds like heaven. It sounds really nice, man. Maybe I'll pay you a visit out there. So, Stephen, what happened to the company? How did they go out of business?
Well, I'm not sure what finally brought them down. I know that things started getting kind of crazy in '78. Like I say, I lived part-time at this small farm in Alabama, and we had quit using it as a runway because we knew the DEA knew about it, and we knew that they'd been watching the place, which didn't bother us because, you know, if you know where some of them are, then they aren't somewhere else.
Right.
But so I had moved. I had put all my money into antiques as a hedge against, you know, later on. I had a buddy that had been in the business, and he was an antique dealer then, and he would sell me like a chest of drawers for $50 and give me a receipt for $1,500, and that way I'd clean up that much money. So I'd stored all my stuff there at this house, plus I had a ski boat and 5 motorcycles, and like I say, this extensive CB set up and about $10,000 worth of electronic equipment. And one Memorial weekend, I got a call saying, don't worry, we're not going to be doing anything. If you want to take a couple of days off, you could do it. Because normally we were on 24/7 call. You got the call, you took off. You had to be ready at all times. And holidays, we worked all holidays. Christmas, New Year's Eve, we were out on the runway. Because that was the best time to bring in something.
Yeah.
The roads were crowded then. The police were at low, there weren't so many of them out there. So anyway, I took off. I just bought a new 4-wheel drive. I loaded it up and took off, and it was turned off the gas, electricity to this house. Come back home, it was gone. The house, my car, everything melted, burned to the ground. They used several barrels of aircraft fuel that were stored up in the barn to burn my house down. And that scared me because I was still too naive back then to think that the government could do something like that. And I didn't think we had any enemies. The only thing I could think of was, well, maybe the Ku Klux Klan found out what we were doing here somehow, and I couldn't figure it out. So I went back to my people and said, I need to take a few days off and go home and think about all this. This is getting a little crazy here. So in the meantime, some DEA agents were following a friend of mine from this other group that I'd been working with when I first got down there. And they saw us together in a bar, and they overheard me saying that I just bought a new camper, put on the back of my truck, and I was going back to Illinois. So they put 2 and 2 together and figured I was taking a big load back. So they come swarming in on the I'd rented. The next day, I think 4 grams of hash, and ended up running me in, giving me the whole work down, saying, hey, we know what you're doing. We know you're out on this runway on this night. We know the truck with you and all this. And their information was correct. It told me that somebody I was working with was a narc. But they were always on the wrong runway at the wrong time. Because, see, if I picked up anything strange, a few clicks on the aircraft radio, and then the pilot, he made it up his mind where to land. He had 2 more places he could land, and it was up to him then which one he landed at. So they never got us, and I realized that when they were telling me this. Well, yeah, you were there. but you were never at the right place at the right time, you know. And they kept on. After being in interrogation for about 3 or 4 hours, my girlfriend had gotten a call out to my people, and they sent up an attorney, and he burst past the detectives and pounded on the interrogation room door, you know, until they let him in, and we got out of it, and we ended up making a deal with the judge, you know. But then they said that my girlfriend was the informant. Well, I knew that she didn't know any of this information until they told it to her, because she was smart enough not to ask.
Well, who thought she was the informant? The company thought? The company thought your girlfriend was the informant?
Yeah, the police told her that she was the informant. That's how they'd gotten all this information. And the company wanted me to get rid of her. And I said, no, I know she's not the informant. So, you know, we'll just get out of here. And they were all getting ready to change identities and move the operation from Atlanta to somewhere else. So I told them, I said, you guys change your identities, you move the operation, we're going to go back to the Midwest. We don't know who you are now or where you're going to be, so you don't have to worry about us. But one of you is a narc. And there was, you know, one of them was a narc. It was one of the guys that we had hired just to buy land, actually. He was the kind of guy, he had a family name, and everybody thought he had lots of money. So we used him to buy land for where we would put in a runway. And he ended up being the snitch that brought us all down. I heard that they got him with a semi half loaded with onions and half loaded with pot, and that's what brought him down. Ricky ran for years. You heard about how he got caught, didn't you?
No, how did he get caught?
They almost caught him several times. In fact, one time they even got his dog and didn't get him. And I know they had to be really close behind because Ricky loved his dog. But anyway, they finally caught him. And he was down in Florida, and he walked into a hotel bar to get a drink, and the DEA was having a retirement party for somebody there in the bar. And everybody at the bar recognized him because he was on the top 5 wanted list.
Well, that's great. Now, what happened to him? Did he? How much time did he get?
I'm not sure how much time Ricky got. I retired in '78, and I thought that maybe I was going to slide until about a year and a half later. I walk into a bar in Springfield, Illinois, and there's 2 of my buddies that were pilots for the company there at the bar. They'd heard that. Well, it was one of the places where all the night timers ended up. But anyway, I walked in and they were standing there, and I knew that either they'd retired too, or they came up to party with me, or they came up to warn me. And unfortunately, it was the latter. They said, "Yeah, the shit's hit the fan." Sorry,
yeah,
but the dung has hit the fan, and your name's on the list. So I loaded up my camper and I ran for a year. But my father delivered the mail for a mail department, and they kept putting pressure on him. So I ended up coming home and turning myself in after about a year on the road or running.
Now, this was on the charges for the 7 ounces?
No. That at this time there was no charges on me. They were just looking to talk to me.
Okay.
Well, I knew what looking to talk to me meant. You know, they knew how much I'd been involved. They didn't know quite how much I'd been involved, but they knew that I was on the inner circle. You know, no, the 7 ounces, I don't even think that if you look, you even find anything about that even left on my record. I think my people got that kind of expunged completely.
Gotcha. Now, so then when they wanted to talk to you this second time, what were they going to charge you with that time? Did they ever charge you with anything?
No, not at that time. All I knew was that they wanted to talk to me. Well, that's the way they do it, you know. They say, well, they get you in there and they say, well, we can charge you with this and we can charge you with that. And I didn't want to talk to them. I thought maybe if I stay gone long enough, they'll get tired of looking for me, and they've got the ringleaders. Maybe they'll let me go, but it didn't work out that way. I was originally charged with the RICO conspiracy to smuggle marijuana. Was the original charge, organized crime.
So now, this time, was there anybody to help you with a lawyer, though?
No. No, everybody was. I still had a little money, and my parents helped me out a lot. And I got the charge. Well, after I came back and turned myself in, I got the charges reduced to aiding and abetting possession of marijuana with intent to distribute. But no amount was ever stated. No amount ever came up until I went in front of the parole board later.
And then what amount came up at that point? What did they say that? 1,000 pounds? 10,000 pounds?
Well, over 200,000 pounds.
Oh my God! Okay, how much time did you wind up doing?
Well, I got 2 years originally for aiding and abetting possession of marijuana, and because of my record and everything, I got it suspended. But then I goofed up and I sold 2 ounces of pot to a friend of mine who was in a bad way, and ended up getting 30 days for selling him the 2 ounces. But by then, in the beginning, nobody talked. Everybody kept their mouth shut. Ricky wasn't talking. Nobody was talking. Michael Grassi, who was the one that could have really hurt me, he was keeping his mouth shut. He'd gotten 33 years. But by the time that I turned myself in, Michael and Ricky and all of them had testified in front of a Senate subcommittee on narcotics trafficking and to reduce their sentences. And the DEA then found out that I'd done a lot more than they thought I'd done. So they were mad, but they couldn't add any more time on because we'd already made a deal. So when I went in front of the parole board, they revoked my probation or my suspended sentence, for this 2 ounce sale. And when I went in front of the parole board, and then they sent me to Minnesota, Sandstone, Minnesota, 22 degrees below zero when I got there, because in the federal system, they can move you up or down at their discretion, one level. So they sent me to a level 2 up in Sandstone just to make things bad, so I'd be far away from my friends and family. And then I went in front of the parole board up there, and they said, well, we know that what do we got here? We got aiding and abetting possession of marijuana. Well, as far as we're concerned, aiding and abetting, anyone that aids and abets to be considered a principal. So we strike that off. So what do we got? Possession of marijuana with intent. I argued the most they'd ever caught me with was 7 ounces of pot. They came back and said, no. We know that you participated in over 200,000 pounds of pot, so that's the amount that we're going to use. You got your break in court. And not only are you going to do every day of your 2-year sentence, we're going to add 2 years special parole on top of that. And special parole is if you get busted any time during special parole, you go back for 2 more years, then do 2 more years on special parole. It can turn into a lifetime sentence.
How much time did Grassi do?
I think Michael did about 8 or 9 years of his 33. They got a significant reduction after testifying in front of the Congress.
And when he got out, he resumed your friendship with Grassi?
No, not for many years. I just located him on Facebook. In fact, a few years ago, he was growing Christmas trees down in North Carolina or South Carolina. I'm still in touch with his daughter. I talk to her regularly online.
Let me ask you a question now. After you've been through all of this, what do you think now when you see that they've legalized marijuana? They got these big stores. They got stores here bigger than Kmart, big, giant stores, and there's a line around the block, and they're making tens of thousands of dollars a day. What do you man?
Oh, I know. I helped organize and put on, when I came back to Illinois in 78, my friend said, hey, a friend of mine is organizing a smoke-in to try to get marijuana legalized. So I said, great, I want to go. So we go there, and it was on the state capitol, on the steps of the state capitol. And when we got there, the government said, well, we said you could have this demonstration, but we didn't say you could use our electricity. So I told my friend, I said, hey, I got a generator at home. I didn't tell him it was a generator that used to light airstrips for hot planes. But I went home and got the generator and brought it back. And as it turned out, the guy that was in charge of the state police, or the state police that were guarding the Capitol, was my next door neighbor. I'd taken his daughter to the prom. he saw me coming with that generator. My nickname was Weeby back then. He said, damn, Weeby, I thought that we were going to get out of here early. I said, no, we're going to have a smoke-in. So we had a smoke-in, and the next year I helped organize the smoke-in. So in 78 and 79, we had thousands of people there on the grounds of the state capitol. And we were so sure back then that it was going to be legalized. The company even bought tobacco licenses because the government said when we legalize, the people with tobacco licenses will be the first people that get permission to grow it. So we bought up several tobacco licenses, which were pretty expensive, So we were ready. We were so sure it was going to be legalized within a year or two. That was almost 50 years ago.
So, Steve, we've only got about a minute left. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, I'm just glad that things have finally changed, that my grandkids don't have to worry about going to prison over a natural plant that's never hurt anybody at all. When I went to prison, I'd say 80% of the people in the low-level federal system were there for drugs. Mainly marijuana. In fact, I dealt marijuana while I was in federal prison.
Right.
That's another story.
Real quick, how'd you get it inside? How'd you get it? Through the help of the correction officers?
No. We had when I got moved from Minnesota down to Indiana, outside of the main prison there, we had a camp. And when a visitor would pull in, they would leave it in the back seat. And we had a little guy that was real fast, that he would run out and grab it and come back in and hide it, and have 4 or 5 people to testify that he never left his room.
Gotcha.
And then if anybody brought it in, we had 3 guys, one for the white guys, one for the Chicanos, and one for the blacks, who did the distributing. You would take it to that distributor. Well, it just so happened that when they assigned me a room, I was in the same room with the guy that distributed for the white guys. So when he got out, the job kind of fell to me.
Hey, Stephen, we're totally out of time, my friend. Thank you so much.